Hey, what's up everyone? On today's video, I will cover the Massachusetts Metropolitan District Commission Police, a now defunct regional state-level law enforcement agency that was active and served between the 19th and 20th centuries and served as the primary police force for the various state, public lands, waters, facilities, buildings, and critical infrastructures across the greater Boston area. It covered a variety of properties, again, those owned by the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, specifically by the Massachusetts Metropolitan District Commission, for which it fell under. These properties did include, in fact, out of the various properties they handled, one of them was, of course, the Revere Beach, the first public beach in the United States. So they were very famously known for that, but aside from that, they were also one of the largest police forces at their time, especially at their peak. So, but without further ado, I am Nicholas, and you're watching the Law Enforcement Agency Information Channel. The Massachusetts Metropolitan District Commission Police, or MDC Police for short, also known as the Metropolitan Police, simply but unofficially, as engraved on its logo or patch, was a prominent, uniformed, full-service regional Massachusetts state law enforcement agency that acted as a division of the Massachusetts Metropolitan District Commission, or MDC for short, from 1893 until its joint merger with the Massachusetts Department of Public Safety Division of State Police, Massachusetts Registry of Motor Vehicles Division of Law Enforcement, and Massachusetts Capitol Police into the modern Massachusetts Department of State Police, or as more commonly referred to as the Massachusetts State Police, in 1992. But as commonly mistaken, just to debunk this, the MDC Police, it was not a standalone agency. It fell under a greater government agency, the MDC, and thus, rather, it was a law enforcement arm of a greater government agency, the MDC. And because of that, its organizational structure was highly designed to mimic that of the MDC's public works system. Therefore, it wasn't technically a police department in the traditional sense, but rather a police division or a division with policing authority. The MDC Police, though, it was at their peak, which was around the early 1990s, the third largest police force in New England, with over 600 sworn state peace officers at the time. It was primarily responsible for protecting and policing the properties of the MDC, which primarily consisted of parklands, roadways, also office buildings, recreational facilities, and critical infrastructures. So this would include sewage disposal systems, water supply systems, and several others. But it is important to note that the vast overwhelming majority, actually, of these properties were located within the greater Boston area, or the metropolitan Boston area, as also referred to as. Ironically, though, even though the MDC primarily maintained properties within the greater Boston area, its successor agency, the Massachusetts Department of Conservation and Recreation, or DCR, actually now has properties throughout the Commonwealth. But aside from that, MDC police officers, who were actually often referred to in local vernacular as the Mets, simply, they would enforce all Massachusetts state laws and were empowered to do so, along with also enforcing MDC rules. Their duties, aside from their overall responsibilities, their primary specific individual duties consisted of protecting, patrolling, and policing MDC parks, buildings, and facilities by providing and maintaining a uniformed police presence at and around them. Also, protecting and patrolling public roads that run through or along MDC properties. And then also, and then again, this of course also includes responding to accidents, crashes, and any real activity or event that occurs on those highways. They were basically the primary police organizations responsible for those highways. But additionally, another duty of them was responding to emergencies, incidents, civil unrest, and crimes that were taken at or nearby MDC buildings and facilities. So this would consist of and include traffic collisions, shootouts, burglaries, protests, major demonstrations, and several other incidents. And then another duty of them was patrolling MDC waterways. So they were very often conducting marine patrol, especially when they established their marine patrol unit, which was in the later 1900s, around the 1970s, around then, or 60s. They were responsible for patrolling MDC waterways, enforcing state established wake zones, state boating laws, state maritime laws, state laws, and MDC regulations against polluting and drinking on beaches, and people who were not sober, so enforcing laws against them, or boaters under the influence, BUIers. But this is of course they frequently conducted these operations both on sea and on the beaches that were along them. But they may have, for example, been seen using, for example, binoculars to catch fast speeders or spot teenagers having parties while drinking on MDC beaches. Doing this, they would very often work alongside local harbor masters like those from the BPD and state fish and game wardens from the Department of Natural Resources, which in modern day is the Department of Natural Resources. I believe it's the Department of Conservation and Recreation. I believe. Or actually, I might be wrong on that. Don't trust me on that. But they would also frequently respond on boat to calls at sea alongside the U.S. Coast Guard and coordinate with them over such. Another duty of them was investigating criminal acts and violations that took place at MDC properties. These criminal acts and violations would range from serious criminal acts like murder to low-level infractions like parking violations. Now, they would find out about these violations and criminal acts through patrols and through, reports from the public. But as you can see, the MDC Police, it was no ordinary park police force. In fact, what made it so unique compared to other park police forces was its unique function as both an urban-oriented police force, a highway patrol agency, and a park police force, while also maintaining full policing authority throughout any municipality it had properties within. Another way it diverged from most park police forces was the variety of specialized units it maintained for its purposes, aside from including and asides from park policing. For example, when it comes to its specialized units, it had motorcycle patrols who swept highways at day and night to facilitate the flow of traffic, enforce laws, and respond to vehicle accidents and collisions. These motorcycle patrols were also frequently involved in specialized event security, like motorcades for guarding and escorting visiting dignitaries, and escorting, school buses during the Boston busing crisis. It also maintained full service detective units that were responsible for criminal investigations and undercover operations, like that for surveillance and drug interdiction. Frequently, these MDC police undercover agents from these units would be often deployed to cities and towns around the greater Boston area, like Boston, to assist in wrapping down skyrocketing crime rates, which were climaxing at their time. It also maintained a dedicated tactical unit that was charged with high-risk warrant execution and riot control for both the interests of the MDC Police and for the interests of other law enforcement agencies requiring assistance. Now, in doing this all, they helped ensure their primary focus was met, which was to maintain law and order within the properties and critical infrastructures managed by the MDC, which they effectively did, considering that the majority of MDC properties are still in effect or they still exist to this day, allowing for, again, their continued use to this day, especially when it comes to critical infrastructures like water supply systems. Those are especially helpful at their time, and because the MDC Police protected them, it allowed for their continued use to this day. So that way, the state government didn't have to basically fund for entire new ones to be built. But it was also in charge of securing the Charles River Esplanade on July 4th celebrations alongside this agency, other law enforcement agencies that would provide assistance. These agencies were particularly the Massachusetts Department of Public Safety Division of State Police, which is in modern day the Massachusetts State Police. They mainly patrolled the highways and thoroughways that ran through or along the Charles River Esplanade. They also received assistance from the Boston Police Department, or BPD, who assisted on occasion in providing Boston municipal policemen and patrolmen to protect Boston citizens and enforce the state law implemented wake zones, utilizing their harbor masters divisions. But the MDC Police, it also provided security assistance regularly at the Boston Marathon. It also offered to provide and did regularly provide assistance to local police using their specialized SWAT team. It also assisted in controlling various protests and demonstrations, including those that took place on university campuses like the Massachusetts Institute of Technology and at courthouses during court-ordered desegregations in the 1970s. They also assisted in protecting and escorting visiting dignitaries, both those of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts and those of the U.S. Department of State. The MDC Police had some of the it really did have some of the oldest and most resourced and skilled tactical teams in Massachusetts at its time, certainly in the greater Boston area. They were alongside the tactical units of the Boston Police Department and Massachusetts State Police, some of the greatest. They were especially renowned. The MDC Police's tactical units in particular were especially renowned for their ability to respond fast, which primarily stemmed from the large amount of officers, the many officers that they had that allowed them to provide more resources during emergencies and requests for assistance in cities and towns around the greater Boston area. But during the late 19th century and throughout the 20th century, the MDC Police's tactical units, they would routinely provide tactical assistance to smaller cities and towns in the form of mutual aid when requested. But if you were to compare them and if you were to rank the best police tactical teams in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts at that time, I would argue that and most people would argue and agree that the Boston Police Department's tactical teams were probably consistently ranked as number one. And this was mainly because of how much they contributed to significantly lowering crime rates throughout the city of Boston at their time. They really did. They were good at suppressing high crime rates in areas that generally had very high crime rates to begin with, like Dorchester. They were called Soul Patrol Units. They were essentially strike forces, the BPD's form of strike forces, but it was really an era that they had these tactical units because they eventually, abolished them later on. But during this era, they were very helpful in basically deterring criminal acts within, high crime neighborhoods, particularly Dorchester and Roxbury. These elite tactical teams very much dominated in handling specialized tactical situations. They were involved in warrant execution, undercover operations, surveillance, and several other, high-risk operations. But another key tactical unit of the Boston Police Department was the Youth Violence Strike Forces. They were really established in the 1990s, essentially to intervene tactically in the sub-neighborhoods of Dorchester that were struggling with particularly violent crimes and drug crimes. These neighborhoods, they were very often they ranged from housing developments or sub neighborhoods to intersections like Codman Square and Beaudoin Street, where essentially teenage gangs were constantly engaging in drug deals and shootouts with each other, essentially over disputes they had with each other. They were also engaging in several other illegal activities, but those were the most prominent. The BPD's city-wide anti-crime unit and tactical squads also later on engaged in tactical intervention within Manhattan, which also had faced extreme violent crime rates, particularly due to open-air drug markets and high-risk warrants that had to be executed. Especially in its hotspots, which were often targeted the most, by these BPD strike forces, like areas around Blue Hill Avenue and the Franklin Field housing projects, alongside its tactical intervention in the, again, previously said, high crime areas. But downtown Boston, it would also frequently face street violence, and therefore were also very often a frequent target of the BPD, whose tactical and undercover units, alongside those often of the MDC Police too, would often very much flood the, particularly the areas or neighborhoods most prominent streets like Washington Street and Essex Street, mainly to combat crimes and prevent them from spreading to other neighborhoods and commercial districts. Again, they really wanted to prevent local stores from being robbed and local citizens from being terrorized and burglarized. But later on, another key Boston Police Department tactical unit was the BPD Tactical Patrol Force. This was especially prominent during the Boston busing crisis era, as it was formed to conduct crowd control and escort black students and the buses they would ride on to and from city public schools from being hurt by riders upon, again, U.S. federal and Massachusetts state court-ordered school desegregation or school integration. Those two terms are used interchangeably. They both refer to the major Boston busing crisis that occurred during this time. I could also give the example. So a famous incident that occurred involving Boston Police Department Tactical Protective Force officers uh, or patrol force officers was the incident in which occurred where basically a bunch of Boston Police Department tactical officers from that unit swarmed a bar, specifically the Rabbit Inn, across from the Old Colony housing project in South Boston, essentially in an effort to suppress anti-busing violence that had prompted the injury the previous injury of a uniformed of another uniformed Boston Police Department tactical officer from that unit when he was trying to control a large crowd. Following his injury, these tactical Boston Police Department officers, they were really trying to show the public that they weren't kidding and that they were going to arrest people. And that was when they really that was really when they were seen toughening up, essentially, and beginning to apprehend resisting protesters and rioters, essentially starting an escalation for the standoff. But later on in the late 1900s, South Boston was full of homicides and high crime rates. So another, tactical team was set in of the BPD. I mean, it was not one tactical team; it was several tactical teams. They were called in to help and assist, particularly around the areas with the highest crimes, which was mainly around the Brownlee Health Housing Complex within the Jamaica Plain neighborhood of South Boston. This area, it was a major pocket at the time for violent crimes and narcotics distribution, and was a frequent target of tactical and undercover law enforcement. But I would now, aside from the Boston Police Department and its ranking at the time in the most in having the most skilled tactical police forces, the most skilled tactical police units in Massachusetts at its time. Aside from them, which were again ranked usually among the first place, I would say the second ranking police tactical team was the Massachusetts State Police tactical teams. They technically did not have real tactical teams in the traditional sense until the 1970s, around then. And that was actually for most police forces in Massachusetts. But throughout their history, they have had highly paramilitary style training. So them, compared to standard local police, were much more trained and capable of dealing with high-risk tactical situations, and thus they were often, among the best for their unique ability to, respond statewide to high-risk situations and, provide very professional and elite assistance. Since again, their troopers, they went through very rigorous training. They were prepared for these situations. And they were also, great because they maintained specialized equipment which they could provide in those situations, which was very helpful, especially for those high risk scenarios. The Massachusetts State Police tactical teams, they were frequently seen actually, along Boston busing crisis protests. They were actually able very much to suppress protesters from basically, if you look at Boston police trying to suppress protesters versus Massachusetts State Police trying to suppress protesters, and again, this is particularly referring to the Boston busing crisis, the Massachusetts State Police was much better and much more effective because their troopers were they had a renowned presence. They were renowned for their ability, for their of course like all state troopers, they were renowned for being very tough, being very well trained. That it was much less people had the gut to basically go against them and try to go go through their way. So they were great for patrolling demonstrations, but of course also in literal high risk tactical operations like warrant execution. But the MDC police, when it comes to itself, I would rank it actually as like the third, or among, or around there, for the best police tactical units in Massachusetts at its time. The reason why I rank it as third instead of second or first is mainly because they were much more regional than they were statewide. They were also typically, I mean, of course, Boston Police Department, its tactical units were citywide. So why am I bringing up, their boundaries? Well, I mean, aside from what they covered, they compared to this, I mean, they compared to the other tactical units, they were typically much less trained and tactically equipped for high risk situations. If you ask any person who grew up at that time, many would say that the MDC police, its officers did not receive that much training. And I mean, it is very much true because their standards were equivalent or sometimes even cited as lesser than the standards of municipal police forces, despite the fact they were state law enforcement. But yeah, they were well trained, and but I mean, so in terms of why they were considered third place and why they did rank on the podium, their they did have dedicated tactical units. These tactical units, they, unlike the Massachusetts State Police, which did not have which did not have official tactical units until like the 1970s, where it began to develop its modern stop team. Or yeah, I mean, the MDC Police, it's had real official tactical units since the beginning of its history. Essentially, they root back some of the farthest out all tactical units in Massachusetts. They were also highly respected for their broad focus and ability to provide far more than enough officers in situations requiring rapid response, and many officers, like large riots, critical emergencies such as shootouts, high-risk scenarios such as hostage situations, marine security operations, and large events. As you probably can notice, the MDC Police, it did not just handle warrant execution. It also handled marine security operations, riot policing. It had a very broad focus when it comes to their tactical teams and themselves in general. But aside from the tactical side, the MDC Police, aside from this, the MDC Police, it has patrol jurisdiction. I'll get into its jurisdiction later, but just to bring up something important right now, it has patrol jurisdiction across cities and towns that the MDC and thus it served, and did. The reason I'm bringing this up is, unlike its modern day successor, the Massachusetts State Police, it did fairly exercise this authority for the majority of their field operations. The Massachusetts State Police, it is and it has always been really a highly paramilitary fashion statewide state law enforcement agency, and has and is still to this day primarily focused on highways, state properties, and unincorporated areas. The MDC Police, on the other hand, is much like the modern day Massachusetts Bay Transportation Authority, or MBTA for short. Is much like their transit police department. I mean, it is much more of a community-oriented street police force. I mean, as after all, it is a regional state law enforcement agency, as the first word in its name suggests. But stay with me here. It you know, it really is much more friendly and community based than the Massachusetts State Police. You are much more likely to have seen the Massachusetts State Police having its troopers patrol on major thoroughways and highways than the MDC Police. The MDC Police, they were very often seen conducting traffic stops on local intersections and roads. And that is because, again, some of the MDC properties did run into those roads. It did run into those, local urban areas. For this reason, its officers, particularly over time as they began becoming more known for doing street patrols and engaging with communities, began to gain also one of their informal but common referring names, the beat cops, or more simply, the beats. If local police weren't around at night, they would frequently engage in routine patrols on urban street areas, breaking up street fights and responding to 911 calls, reports of vandalism, burglaries, noise complaints, and even in more dangerous neighborhoods like Dorchester, street shootouts between local conflicting rival gangs. And again, these kind of patrols around the neighborhood, to figure out there's an emergency that you should respond to. These are usually referred to, and this is just for policing in general. They're very often referred to as beats. That, like, I'm gonna do a beat around the block, and that is a very common policing term, and that is why they began to be referred to the beat cops. And this reiterates that they are very much community oriented compared to your average statey. Again, they were also known to conduct routine traffic stops at day and night on traffic violators within local roads. Again, their ability to enforce local laws, because again, I know this seems a lot like local policing, they worked their way around it because many municipalities did not really care whether they had presence there. Nowadays, if you have like state troopers patrolling cities and towns all day and night when they already have a dedicated police force, cities and towns can get pretty mad, especially their police forces, because it's one thing if it's just like for once, like they're helping out local police, but if it's constant, they're basically taking their jobs, and that isn't fun, for any of them. And it's kind of, jurisdiction is very often a fighting topic in law enforcement. Local communities, they really were quick to tolerate their presence, and basically for increased law enforcement security, since again their police forces were developing at those times, and some cities and towns didn't even have a police force at the time, though most were developing their own police forces. But they were very quick to tolerate their presence, and for that reason, they did technically allow them often to enforce local laws, on occasion, or actually not on occasion, frequently. They would especially, they would especially even ask for their presence at night, where local police presence wasn't all that common. They would frequently engage again because 24/7 law enforcement, full service law enforcement, that thing wasn't that common back then. They would frequently engage in field sobriety tests and operations for locating and deterring drunk drivers, and this is particularly aside from housing districts. Aside from that, again, still in these local communities, they would do those primarily at city thoroughways and intersections. But to debunk another important thing, as commonly mistaken, none of its former duties were founded into the Massachusetts Environmental Police, or MEP for short. The Massachusetts Environmental Police, it is a completely separate state law enforcement agency with a completely separate focus. It is primarily centered upon enforcing Massachusetts state environmental laws, statewide, not just on, not on, just in general. They do not protect state properties once owned by the MDC, even if they are still state properties to this day, and are managed under the DCR. Though that is really in the focus of the modern Massachusetts State Police, as that is what the MDC Police evolved into. But along with other state law enforcement agencies. But it is important to know, though, that Massachusetts Department of Conservation and Recreation, its Ranger Services Division, has inherited some of the former duties of the MDC Police. Again, a very small proportion of the MDC Police's entire duties. And this was primarily those duties related to conservation. But aside from that, again, as the MDC Police, as I stated earlier, as it was a police division or district, it was commanded by a superintendent, which is essentially an equivalent to a police chief. And is, again, thus, often referred to as such, informally. But the last person to really hold the position of a MDC police superintendent was William J. Bratton. Before his career in the MDC Police, he served as the Boston Police Commissioner, and later on he served as the New York City Transit Police Chief, I believe. Yeah. I believe he moved directly from the MDC Police to the New York City Transit Police to serve as their head there. But that's pretty much it for the main responsibilities and individual duties.